This is the second of 3 parts for Method of Instruction under the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer course, St. John Brigade Zone 10, Singapore. For this second lesson, we'll be talking about lesson planning. The first lesson was already about psychology of instruction, and quite a lot of those concepts are used here. So if you have not watched video 1, I would suggest you do so now. Moving on, the objective of this lesson is to allow you to create effective learning objectives and assessments, create effective slides and materials for lessons, and to use lesson plan templates to plan lessons. Okay, we'll start off with the objectives and assessments. Just an analogy, if you're going to climb a mountain, your goal is to reach the top of the mountain. And how do you know you're there? You look around, there's no part higher than this place where you're standing, you're at the top. Same with lesson planning. You need to have an objective, and you need to know how to recognize whether you have achieved your objectives. Okay, so I will start by saying, how do you write objectives? Okay, we are looking at the higher order learning pyramid, and I would like to pay particular attention to the lower 3 levels, which, if you look at the bottom, knowledge, comprehension, application. These 3 parts are particularly important for St. John's context, because a lot of the first aid, foot drill, leadership skills are at these levels. Okay, so if you look at the example I provided in the box in the top part of the slide, in terms of knowledge, okay, it will be something along the lines of being able to recall information. So I've written a line here: be able to identify signs and symptoms of a sprain, or be able to name signs and symptoms of a sprain. Okay, that is for the knowledge level. Next level, comprehension. Do they understand, and are they able to explain? So if you look at my second line, the trainee will be able to explain the necessity of reducing the swelling. Why do we need to reduce swelling? With ice. Okay, why do we need to? So the trainee needs to be able to explain this as a show of his successful learning. Third part, okay, be able to apply what we have learned to solve a problem. So basically, application, simple. In our St. John's first aid context is normally being able to treat so and so injury. In this case, treat the sprain with RICE, okay, which we know is actually rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Okay, so these are objectives, and for every single lessons that you conduct, you should ideally have quite a few of these lines written down. For each type of injury each type of first aid treatment and injury that you teach to your trainees, you should have a few lines of this to measure how successful you are. Next, types of assessments. Okay, if you look at the picture, formative, summative. I would like to just say summative is what you're very familiar with. Your O levels, A levels, your adult first aid, basic first aid, your mid-year exams, your CASA, those are summative. Those exams give you a score. They show you how good you are in your whole cohort, whether you need to put in more effort, and some of them qualify you for certain credentials. So if we clear AFA, you get your first aid cert. That's the role of summative. However, I want everybody to pay attention to formative assessment. Formative assessment is very important because it is the adjusting of your courseware and your lessons so that your trainees can learn properly and learn effectively. If you are, for example, an instructor, you ask your trainees a question, they are not able to answer, but you have just taught this, it means that you may need to reteach the lesson because the way you taught might not have been very effective. Or it might just mean that the trainees are not ready for this thing that they're learning. So in terms of formative assessment, really ask lots of questions during your training. In fact, plan them out. Put them on your training plan. Okay. In fact, do not use yes/no questions. Use 5W1H, meaning what, when, where, who, why, and how. Because yes and no, some people can just guess. Oh yes, oh no. But it does not mean they really understand. But when you ask them to answer using 5W1H questions, they have to show that they really understand. Okay. Also, when you ask these questions for formative assessments, never penalize. Okay, if he doesn't understand, most probably it's our fault as instructors. Okay, in fact, allow or provide help from other trainees or from yourself if possible. There's no harm in providing hints or clues. Okay, at the end of the day, he or she needs to be able to answer the same question. Okay. I'm just going to give a short example here. So for example, why aspirin for heart attack? This is a kind of question that you can prepare in advance, and you can write down the answer so that you won't look so bad if you can't answer the own questions that you asked. Okay. One thing I also like to emphasize here, if somebody does not know and you are forced to ask a second trainee, please always remember, after the second trainee has managed to answer the question, go back to the first trainee again and make sure he or she repeats the same answer. This is to ensure that, yes, the first trainee who couldn't answer is now able to answer the question. Third, regarding mindset, I think a lot of times we always say, oh, I already taught this thing, I already taught this, that, I don't know why he didn't learn it. No, the responsibility lies with us, okay? We cannot be satisfied with the idea that we have taught it. We need to ensure that the trainees have learned it. If they have not learned it well, then it's our responsibility. Okay, we are moving on to the instructional strategy part. This part will be very heavily reliant on the psychology that I have touched on in the first video. The first thing we need to resolve is motivation. Okay, we have talked about 3 kinds of motivation: competence, purpose, and relatedness. For competence, we need to challenge them just right. Not too overwhelmingly difficult, nor too easy. But sometimes you do not know at what stage and at what level your trainees are at. So it is not really our fault if sometimes we come up with something a bit too difficult or a bit too easy. In the course of the lesson, you have to adjust. Okay, it's a reality that in fact, if you have 20 trainees, not all of them will be at the same level. So there'll always be adjustments here and there. Next, purpose. Why do they need to learn this? You have to be quite upfront about it with them. Sometimes some trainees feel like, oh, I don't know why you're teaching this. There's no point in me learning, so I don't learn. No, you have to let them know, okay, this is for BFA, this is for AFA, this is one of the most common injuries you can encounter. So in case, you're on duty and you don't know how to treat, put these reasons up front. Let them know that these things that you're learning is not pointless or trivial. Lastly, relatedness. The trainees and yourselves, okay, you guys are all involved in this learning process. Don't make it a me versus you, instructor versus trainee situation. Okay, in fact, help them help each other. So, in particular cases, if one trainee does not understand, it's a good idea to actually assign him a buddy who can help him to explain certain things. Okay, to help him learn better or to show him how things can be done. Demonstrations may not always be done by you. In fact, if you're conducting a revision session, you are totally it is always totally okay if you ask a trainee to prepare something and help lead the revision session. Okay, so don't make it an instructor versus trainee. Help each other learn from the experiences. Next, about memory. Okay, memory in learning is always about putting scattered things together so that they start to resemble something that makes sense. And there are a few methods to do it. In particular, I want to talk about building connections and chunking. So, for example, mnemonics. What is mnemonics? Mnemonics are like tricks and tips to help you learn things better, especially arbitrary information. So you can have a song. Or in the case of Heimlich maneuver, we know that to form the fist, you need to have the 5, and then you fold in your thumb, becomes 4, and you fold in all the rest of your fingers, it becomes 0. That's a mnemonic. You can also give more explanations so that in terms of the human physiology, everything makes sense and become interconnected. You can also use acronyms. There's a whole lot of acronyms in first aid training. DRS ABC is one of those. RICE is another. These are very useful for people to remember steps and procedures. Lastly, you can actually share with your trainees some stories about real cases that you have encountered or your seniors have encountered. And these stories can actually be pretty good teaching material because they can tell you what to look out for when treating real cases. One thing that you also can do is to always keep elevating the order of learning. So if a trainee is already capable of remembering something at the most foundational lowest level, but he has maybe not he or she is not able to understand something, then you teach for the sake of understanding. Once they are unable to understand, then maybe you will go towards the ability to apply the information or knowledge learned in new ways. So at the top level of applying, you can actually say, give them a case, vary the parameters, change the situation and context a bit, and see how they can adapt and adjust. Okay, we will not go into analyzing, evaluating, and creating because that is a bit high level. So we will just stick to the lower 3 levels, remembering, understanding, applying. Here is another learning pyramid. Okay, this is a different learning pyramid. Okay, this is about active learning and passive learning. What's active learning? Active learning means that the trainee has to pay attention and has to process and think about the things that they are doing. And active learning is definitely preferred when compared to passive learning. The most passive learning we know of is actually, no surprise, lectures. But it is unfortunately the most cost-effective way when we want to teach to a large group of people. Okay, so because of that, there's no choice. But if you can replace lecture with other forms of learning, that will be great. For example, audio-visual. Is there an instructional video that you can provide? Okay, for example, demonstration. For a practical skill, instead of telling them in speech, can you show it to them how to do it? Okay, and even more active down the row, okay, is to let them practice by doing. Okay, especially for first aid skills, practice by doing is definitely a very, very important component. And the last one might seem a bit, weird, but teaching others is actually the best way to learn because they have to think about how to explain things and how to demonstrate things. So they will be using a lot of their processing power to think about the issue, and through that process they will learn a lot. Okay, so try to make learning active. Lastly, I think I want to touch on the mastery part. Always believe that in growth mindset. Believe your trainees can learn. Don't give up on them. If they cannot answer the question, come back to them again. Ask them again after they have learned. Okay. Always provide feedback. Keep telling them that they have made mistakes here, sure. But also tell them when they have done well. When they have done a good job, please tell them so that they can know what is right, what is wrong, and have a stronger growth. Lastly, so-called feedback loops is to automate the feedback process. Okay, give them practice time, but also give them clear criteria of what makes a good, for example, skill, what it means to have succeeded in doing a certain skill. Okay, give them the time to practice, reflect, and to find out for themselves. Okay, whether which way doing it is correct, and then you come back, you can look at it again and give them a feedback again. Okay. Third part of lesson planning is to gather and prepare resources. I think it's very clear that you need classroom time, you need manpower to teach lessons, you need supplies, you need the venue, computer, stationery. I cannot overemphasize that a lot of times I have seen trainees who walk into the venue and expect that everything is set up for them and forget this and forget that, and then after that trainees spend 15-20 minutes waiting for the instructor to get ready. That's not acceptable. Okay, so you need to get all those things ready. But one of the main things I need to talk about here is actually the PowerPoint slides. I know that some of you inherit your seniors' PowerPoint slides, but I would say please make sure that you always improve and adjust it according to your trainees' needs. Okay, a good PowerPoint deck of slides can be easily understood, it's not distracting to the trainees, and it adds value to the learning process. Which means what? It has to be better than the whiteboard. If you can do everything by writing on a whiteboard, then why not? Okay, you just write on a whiteboard, problem solved. You don't even need to bring in a computer. Okay, if it is not better than a whiteboard, there's no reason why you need to bring a deck of slides and a computer. Next, the lesson plan. The lesson plan is a bit more optional. I think in the busyness of day-to-day school life, it's very hard for you to have a lesson plan for every single lesson. But if you need to do a really good lesson, you can have a lesson plan. A lesson plan can act as a checklist and it can serve as future easy reference. And if you need to clear all the lesson materials and the lesson concepts with your officers, then the lesson plan will show it quite clearly. Okay, So I'm going to just move on and show you sample slides from past year ENCO trainees and to point out a few good points and bad points about them. So in this particular slide, I would say that my issue is, one, blue words on blue background does not stand out very well. Okay, you should go and study some. You should be aware that some colors contrast better. Orange and blue contrast very well. Black and white contrast very well. So these are colors that you should try and use more. On top of that, basically this slide has highlighted too many things. Okay, if you highlight everything, you might as well not highlight. Thirdly, the picture. Is it helpful for the trainee? In this case, it does not really serve any purpose. Okay, so this is, I would say, not a very good slide. Moving on, I have also in my previous ANCO batches received a whole lesson that is conducted within 4 slides, and that includes the title slide. Within 4 slides, there's way too little content and it's all words. So this is also a very bad example. This one would be a relatively better example. The picture shows the signs very well, and that the words actually help to explain the pictures. So this is a pretty well done slide. And in this particular case, this trainee could not find a picture, and therefore he drew his own. I think this is a very admirable spirit, and I like the way that he did it. Sometimes there is a necessity for us to create our own pictures and images, even if it means we have to take our own photographs. Okay, that was the slides, and this is the lesson plan. This lesson plan is considered a more detailed one. The first up, of course, I have included the goals of the lessons, which is the objectives. The cadets must be able to do what and what. Okay, what are the things they are supposed to be able to perform? Moving down, the logistics and environment. It's basically a checklist here. You have a due date of when you're supposed to secure each item. Okay, and you have all your manpower listed down there. And in case you have participants missing, you have to know how many cadets you have, how many are going for public duty, etc. And the lesson plan proper. Always have a time by when or by how many minutes into the lesson this thing has to be completed. The content that you're going to cover. The PowerPoint slide that actually corresponds to the content, so that for easy reference. And some form of formative assessment that helps to check whether you have got the content down. So in this case, you can see, you have quiz trainees on time to brain death, which would have been 4 to 6 minutes. There are a lot of quiz trainees. These are specific questions that you can use during your lesson. So you can imagine this is something like a guidebook when you're conducting your lesson. If you need to think up on the spot questions, it's a bit hard. So looking at all this lesson planning might be more helpful. In this particular lesson plan, we also have a follow-up session because in this case, a trainee asked a question that the instructor was not able to answer. So he says, okay, by 10 June, I'm going to follow up on his question. Okay. There are some absentees. By when, I'm going to follow up with them. And by week 1 July, I have to perform a revision because we talked about spaced repetition. Within a day, a week, a month, we should at least perform some form of revision so that we can make sure that the trainees remember what they have been taught. Okay, so that was the training plan, and I would like to just round up this lesson with one important thing. I think that generations to generations, St. John as a CCA, every year we change our NCOs, and as a result, everything we use once. All the slides that you have actually used, you use once, and you don't touch them ever again. And I don't think it's a good thing that you don't gather the wisdom of so many batches. What do I mean by gather the wisdom? When you have used the slides or when you have used the materials, what was the trainee's response? What questions were raised? What was the results and outcome of the training session? Do you all document all these? Okay, because as a trainer and an instructor, we are engineers who build things. We are designers who design things. We are scientists that experiments whether training materials are effective. But ultimately, we are a teacher because we want our trainees to learn everything we want to teach. Okay, so there's a need for everybody to really review your training plan so that you can pass on to the next generation and make things better. Okay, I've now come to the end of this second lesson. Thank you. If you have not, once again, seen video 1, please refer to part 1, Psychology of Instruction. The next part will be part 3, the lesson delivery, and I'll see you then.